Hi, my name is Rowan. I took on a second job to help pay for my niece's college tuition. It wasn't glamorous, just extra project work, weekend hours, late nights, but I did it with love. So you can imagine what it felt like when I got an email from her university's Dean of Students, titled Financial Misconduct, Preliminary Review Notice. At first, I thought it was spam. I stared at the subject line from the comfort of my kitchen, still in my robe, coffee cooling in my hand. But it was real. A formal note explaining that I had been reported for tampering with Tess Landon's scholarship fund. The same scholarship I'd helped create with monthly top-ups directly to the school. The email didn't accuse me outright, not yet. It used words like irregularities and clarification request. But beneath that polite language was something unmistakable. I had become the problem. I sat down, reread the message, and opened my files. I had receipts, wire confirmations, every transaction time-stamped. I scrolled back to January, then October, then last June. All payments logged, matched to tuition statements with my routing number. It didn't make sense. None of it. I forwarded the email to Tess, hoping she'd clear it up. Instead, she replied 5 hours later with a single sentence. "You know what you did." I blinked at my screen. The silence that followed felt heavier than the accusation itself. 2 days passed, no calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive voicemail from her mother, Karina, which was almost more alarming. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed Karina myself. She answered on speaker, always with that low background noise, like she wanted witnesses. "Oh hey," she said, bright and sharp. "I was wondering when you'd call." "I got an email from Tess's school," I said. "She reported something serious." There was a pause, then a little click of the tongue, followed by a sigh that smelled like red wine and spin. "Well," she said, "Tess has been feeling a little overwhelmed lately. She's under a lot of pressure. The whole tuition thing has been a lot." "A lot for who?" I asked carefully. "I've been the one sending the money." "You made a few payments, sure," she said. "But the actual college fund came from us." That stopped me cold. "There was no college fund," I said. "You told me she couldn't apply to FAFSA because you'd defaulted on your tax filings." I offered to help. "Oh, Rowan," Karina replied, with a tone she reserved for when she wanted me to feel small. "You've always had such a flair for exaggeration." I hung up, not because I lost control, but because I didn't want her to hear what it sounded like when I started remembering the truth. That night, I went into my home office and pulled out the file I kept labeled Tess, College Support. I hadn't looked at it in weeks. I thought the chapter was closed, the good aunt stepping in where the system failed. But instead, I found evidence that felt like a betrayal wrapped in printer paper. The payments were all there, but what chilled me wasn't the numbers. It was the discovery of a separate bank account linked to my name, one I'd never opened, one that had been receiving transfers from my main account for over a year. The withdrawals were small, always under $500, but frequent, hidden like crumbs, leading to a trap. At the bottom of the statement, primary account holder, R. Everly, secondary beneficiary, Karina Landon. That night, I slept with the lights on, not because I was afraid of danger, but because for the first time in my life, I realized my family didn't need permission to rewrite the story. They just needed my silence, and I'd given them that for years. It had been 3 days since the email, 3 days since the words, "reported for unauthorized access to financial accounts," lit up on my screen like a warning flare in an otherwise routine afternoon. I'd read it at least a dozen times. I could recite the dean's phrasing from memory, the careful neutrality in tone, the clinical way he suggested I contact the university's legal department if I had any questions regarding the allegations. I didn't have questions, I had proof. And I also had rage that had no place to go. On Friday, I drove to Tess's campus. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't text a heads up. I had paid for this semester. I had every right to walk through those gates. The dorm lobby buzzed with its usual scent of cheap disinfectant and warm vending machine pastries. I remembered the first time I dropped Tess off here, her wide-eyed excitement, her gratitude that gushed out in nervous bursts. "I still can't believe you did this for me," she had whispered back then, hugging me tighter than she ever had before. Now, as she opened the door, in a wrinkled t-shirt and mismatched socks, that girl was nowhere to be found. She looked like she had aged overnight. Or maybe I had. She blinked. "You came." "I shouldn't have to," I replied, my voice low but steady. Tess shifted awkwardly, blocking the doorway with one arm. "Mom said you'd make this a thing." "Your mom has said a lot of things. So have you." For a second, her face twitched like she wanted to cry, but she didn't. Instead, she stepped aside and let me in without another word. The dorm room was smaller than I remembered. Half laundry, half textbooks, and one dusty potted plant leaning dramatically toward the window, like it too wanted to escape. I stayed standing. "I got the email," I said. "From Dean Whitaker. He says I've been reported for theft. You named me Tess. You gave them my name." Her hands fidgeted with the drawstring of her hoodie. "I didn't think it'd go that far." "You didn't think?" I echoed. "Or you didn't care?" She looked down, lips pressed so tight they turned white. "I didn't want to lie anymore." "That's rich," I snapped. "After letting me cover your tuition, rent, books, groceries, your emergency dentist visit that mysteriously cost more than a root canal. It wasn't supposed to be permanent," she said quietly. "Mom said we'd pay you back, eventually." I laughed, sharp and sudden. "Eventually, Tess, do you know how many eventualize your mother's thrown at me over the years?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both knew the number was too high to count. I reached into my tote and pulled out the manila envelope I'd prepared the night before. Inside were statements, receipts, signed authorizations, all filed and sorted. The front page held a note, handwritten and clipped with a brass pin. "You don't need to apologize, but you do need to stop lying. And stop letting other people lie for you." Tess took it with trembling hands, then sat down on the edge of her bed. Her knees bounced anxiously. "You still think I'm the villain?" I asked. "No," she whispered. "I think you're the only one who never lied about how much you were giving up." I didn't stay for tea or tears. I left before she could decide whether she wanted to be sorry or defensive. Back home, the silence felt oddly sacred. I lit a wood smoke candle, opened my laptop, and clicked into a new folder titled Restoration Project. Not for revenge, not even for closure, for clarity. I uploaded every file, labeled them meticulously, not just dates and amounts, but intentions, the emotional context behind every dollar. The holidays I worked, double shifts, the birthday I missed so she could fly home from a retreat, the side gig that paid her rent while I delayed a medical procedure. It wasn't generosity they resented, it was that I had evidence of it. And if there's one thing manipulators hate more than confrontation, it's a record that can't be rewritten. It didn't take long for the silence to sour, the kind of stillness that doesn't calm, but curdles, thick with expectation, with invisible tension hanging in the air like static. I hadn't spoken to Karina in years without Tess acting as the bridge. A well-meaning link between two people who barely remembered how to be sisters. But now, with that bridge burning behind us, Karina found a different route, and this time, she chose to go through everyone else. It started with a message from Aunt Lorraine, the kind of text that looks sweet on the surface, but stings when you let it sit. "Hey sweetheart, I heard you've been going through a rough time. Just wanted you to know we're praying for your peace. Don't be too proud to ask for help." I stared at the message for a long while, trying to determine which part of it was concern and which was script. The next came from cousin Maddie, someone I hadn't seen since the last family baby shower. "You're stronger than whatever anxiety you're facing. Don't let shame isolate you." And then came the one that made it all click. A friend of a friend forwarded a post from Addison, one of Karina's high school allies, who still played the role of her digital choir. The caption was vague enough to appear accidental, but pointed enough to sting. Mental health is nothing to be ashamed of, especially when people you love are spiraling. Be kind, be patient. They're not themselves. The comments were filled with hearts and thinking of you sentiments, but everyone knew who it was about. Suddenly, I wasn't the aunt who paid tuition. I was the family ghost story, whispered in hushed tones, diagnosed in group chats, conveniently labeled and archived under emotional instability. A tidy explanation for the fracture they didn't want to explain honestly. I wasn't just being erased, I was being rewritten. I didn't lash out publicly. I knew better than to play chess with people who preferred checkers. Instead, I printed every message, every post, every veiled comment. I annotated them with the dates they were sent, the connections they implied, and the recipients they likely reached. I wasn't paranoid. I was methodical. Then, I did something unexpected. I took a walk, a real one, around the neighborhood, past the coffee shop where I'd once taken Tess to celebrate her first scholarship, past the bookstore where I had once spotted Karina browsing parenting books she never read. I walked until the cold cut through the lining of my coat and my jaw ached from clenching. I didn't bring music or distraction, just breathe, just thought. And by the time I returned, I knew exactly who I needed to call. Jess. She wasn't blood, but she might as well have been. We'd met as teens in the debate club and remained low maintenance, long-distance lifelines, the kind of friendship that didn't need weekly check-ins to stay alive. When I told her what was happening, she didn't ask if I was sure. She asked what she could do, and then she said something I hadn't realized I needed to hear. Rowan. They don't get to be the only ones with a narrative. That night, Jess drove in from Louisville and sat across from me on the living room floor. We surrounded ourselves with printouts and receipts, statements, and social media archives, like two detectives at the edge of something massive. "What are you going to do with it all?" she asked. I didn't answer at first. Then I looked up and said, "I'm going to show them what it looks like when someone stops playing dead." We laughed, a little bitterly, a little triumphantly. Later, Jess confessed something I didn't expect. Karina had once borrowed money from her, too. A small loan, never repaid. A story told to garner sympathy. A late paycheck. A surprise car repair, nothing monumental, but it was part of a pattern. One more thread in the tapestry. I was finally pulling taut. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I opened a new document, narrative correction, a living record, not a rant, not a letter. A ledger of what happened, not just the transactions of money, but of silence, of expectation, of emotional blackmail disguised as obligation. I wrote not to plead, not to defend, but to remember with precision, to anchor myself in facts, because I realized the difference between us wasn't just that I gave and they took. It was that I remembered, and they counted on me forgetting. Some stories only survive if no one ever tells the other side. Have you ever had to rewrite the version of yourself someone else handed you? It didn't happen with a grand announcement. No press release, no viral thread, just a quiet email sent at 7:03 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read, "Clarification regarding Tess Landon's educational support." The recipients were carefully selected: Dean Whitaker, the University Bursar, and a CC to Legal Aid of Kentucky, a blind copy to myself, and one to Jess, my anchor, my witness. The email was 3 paragraphs, concise, unemotional, bulletproof. I attached scans of tuition payments, signed authorizations, the original scholarship rejection letter that prompted my financial intervention, and the forged complaint submitted under my name, claiming unauthorized financial activity. It wasn't just an accusation anymore, it was a paper trail. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I stopped asking to be understood and started demanding to be recorded accurately. By noon, a reply came through from Dean Whitaker's assistant. The tone had changed. It was no longer politely dismissive. Now it was cautious. "We're reviewing your documentation and placing a temporary hold on any action involving your name, pending further verification." That sentence shouldn't have felt like victory, but it did. because for once, someone paused. Not because I raised my voice, but because I finally spoke their language. Proof. I didn't tell anyone in the family. I didn't need to. I knew it would reach them. Things like this don't stay quiet when people like Karina have spent years building their identities on curated myths. Sure enough, the silence cracked by Wednesday afternoon. It started with a text from Tess. Did you really send something to the school? No greeting, no apology, just the sting of entitlement losing ground. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on my porch, watching the light shift over the bricks, letting the question hang where it belonged. In the air, unanswered. She wasn't owed an explanation, not anymore. But what came next, I wasn't ready for. That evening, I received a voice message from Joni. Yes, Joni. Karina's younger daughter. 13. Awkward. A little too observant for her age. She and I had always gotten along in that quiet, unspoken way. She'd once told me I was the only adult who didn't talk down to her. I remember thinking how sad it was that stood out. Her voice on the recording was small but clear. Hi, Aunt Rowan. I saw some stuff on Mom's laptop. I didn't mean to, but she was messaging Aunt Addison about you. She said you were too smart for your own good and needed to be scared before you flipped the whole family dynamic. I think that's why Tess said what she said. There was a long pause. I don't know if this helps, but I thought you should know. I played the message twice, not because I didn't believe it, but because it confirmed what I'd already started to suspect. This wasn't just passive cruelty or emotional distance. It was strategy, a campaign, an orchestrated erasure disguised as family concern. And now a child had seen it too. Then I drafted a second email. This one was shorter. It went to the estate attorney listed in my father's will. Subject: request for account access and confirmation of role in living trust. There was no accusation in that message either, only precision. I didn't demand inclusion. I requested accountability because I had learned something over the last few weeks that had taken me too long to accept. If people don't benefit from your silence, they will always try to reframe your voice as dangerous. But now I was speaking anyway. The next morning, Jess dropped by with coffee. She asked how I was holding up. I told her the truth. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I was coming up for air after years of mistaking drowning for stillness. She nodded, handed me a small brown box. I printed something for you. Inside were 40 pages, laminated, tabbed, labeled. Your full record, she said. Everything you've documented, in case they try to rewrite it again. It was heavier than I expected. I held it like a newborn. Not with affection, but with gravity. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed it on my kitchen table and left it open to the first page. A simple title, bold and centered. Rowan Everly, Contributions, Financial, Emotional, Historical. Underneath, a single line. This is not a threat. This is a counter-narrative. The final reckoning didn't arrive in flames. No shouting, no apology, no last-ditch effort to win me back with tears or baked goods. What came was far quieter, the kind of silence that no longer asked for permission to exist. It had been 2 weeks since I submitted the file. 2 weeks since I'd laid out, line by line, what it had cost to be the one who always showed up. And in those 2 weeks, something strange had happened. Not justice, not even vindication, just space. Space from the noise, the half-truths, the rewritten family histories passed around like potluck dishes, each one missing something essential. Tess didn't call. Karina didn't post. The family group chat, where I was never technically removed, just tactfully ignored, went dead silent. Not even a happy spring meme from Aunt Lorraine. It was almost impressive, the way they fell in line once they realized their old tactics no longer held weight. I spent that Monday morning doing something simple, making a list, not a ledger, not an invoice, though that would come later, just a list of things I had postponed, reading the last 3 books on my shelf, fixing the handle on the hallway drawer, Making an appointment with the physical therapist I kept rescheduling so I could wire money to Tess. And one more thing, finding a new place. Asheville wasn't an escape, it was a return. To quiet skies, to unforced solitude, to a version of me that had existed before guilt became currency in my family. I signed a lease on a small third-floor apartment with uneven hardwood and a chipped balcony railing. It faced west. I liked that. I liked knowing the sun would be the last thing to leave each day. The move took only 2 carloads. I didn't take much, but I brought the binder, the one Jess had printed, 40 pages of what they wanted forgotten. I placed it on the top shelf of my bookcase, next to a candle I never lit, and a photo of my grandfather that Karina had once tried to digitally restore, erasing the scowl from his face and the truth from our memories. A week after settling in, I printed another document, this one shorter, more pointed. Title: Family Ledger, Closed Account Summary. Underneath, a bulleted invoice, styled like a corporate memo. It included totals for tuition, groceries, flights, holidays, unpaid loans, and emotional labor. At the bottom, I added a footnote. This is not a bill, this is a mirror, paid in full, interest unreturned. I mailed one copy to Karina, another to my parents, and a third, folded neatly into an envelope, labeled only with a heart, to Tess. She'd know what it meant, or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I no longer needed the outcome to validate the truth. Joni wrote me a postcard. It arrived unexpectedly. A hand-drawn sketch of a little girl hugging what looked like a dragon. Her handwriting was still inconsistent, some letters backwards, some too big, but the message was clear. I told the truth. That means I can't be in trouble, right? I pinned it to my fridge with a magnet from the bookstore we used to visit when she was little. Some things deserve to be kept, and some things, like the framed family photo Karina had gifted me last Christmas, didn't. I took it down, removed the back, and replaced the photo with a printout of my Asheville lease. A symbol, a boundary, a new start dressed in paperwork. That Friday, I lit a candle. Not the wood smoke one I used to associate with vigilance. This one smelled like pine and honey. It filled the room slowly, warmly, without urgency. I brewed tea, opened my laptop, and clicked into a blank document. Title: Inheritance Isn't Always Money. Underneath, I typed the first sentence. Sometimes the thing you inherit is the silence they taught you, and the courage to break it. I don't know what the document will become. Maybe a blog, maybe a private journal, maybe a guide for others who've spent too long apologizing for boundaries they had every right to set. For now, it's just mine. That night, I stepped onto the balcony. Below me, the street was quiet. A couple walked their dog. Someone played guitar from an open window. No one knew me here, not yet. Not as the villain, not as the fixer. Just a woman in a fleece robe, holding a cup of tea. A stranger to the chaos, and maybe finally a friend to herself. Sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people we once made sacrifices for without hesitation. I learned that love without respect turns into control, and silence often becomes the currency of manipulation. But when you choose clarity over chaos, truth over tolerance, something shifts. You begin again. Not as who they wanted you to be, but as who you actually are. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away, not out of hate, but out of self-preservation? Leave a 1 in the comments if this story hit home, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe more people need stories like this, real and rooted in truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters here.